On the redistricting referendum, we've been watching all night. Allie, what do you got?
We can now call that Virginia voters have voted in favor of a referendum to allow for the redistricting of federal House districts in the state of Virginia, which will allow Democrats now to take 3 to 4 seats, depending on how things go in the midterm elections. We have 82% of the vote in across Virginia. 50.28 has voted in favor of the referendum, 49.72. Now, you might say that feels close with 82% of the vote in. The issue is this, that all of those states, all of those counties and districts that have voted against it, that vote came in pretty early. The 2 big counties where we still don't have as much of the count in yet is 51% in Fairfax County. This is the biggest county, Northern Virginia. It's the biggest county in the entire state. We know how this goes in Virginia. So right now it's trending 71 to 29. The percentage there is probably going to stay the same or go higher. That is the case in a few counties around D.C., although most of these are almost complete, 95% there, 97% there. The other thing to do is go around Richmond, where, again, 60% of the vote is in. That's 81-18. Again, 40% of the way to go there. We're likely to see the margins run up, which is why at 82% we're able to call this.
Allie Velshi, thank you very much. That's big news.
Like, what is that, you know?
But I have to ask,
should Democrats have passively sat by as Republicans gerrymandered?
Well, it's not that they actively sat by. They used to say this is a threat to democracy. You don't get to choose your voters. It should be the other way around. I mean, Obama gave very compelling remarks on these things. And so was that a lie?
No.
Or... Okay, so it's okay to threaten democracy and destabilize.
Fact patterns change, and what this fact pattern did was that Donald Trump called and said, "I'm trying to win this next election because we think we're going."
Let's be real for a second. Most people hear something like redistricting, referendum, and immediately tune out. But this is one of those moments where, if you understand what's happening, you start to see how the entire system actually works. In this clip, they're talking about Virginia voters approving a measure that allows congressional districts to be withdrawn. And right away, to highlight that this could shift 3 to 4 seats toward Democrats. Now, that may not sound like much at first, but think about it. Control of the House can come down to just a couple seats. So 3 or 4 seats isn't small. That's power. That's the difference between passing laws or stopping them, between more spending or less spending, between policies that directly affect your day-to-day life. So here, what this actually means. This isn't about maps. It's about outcomes. And this is where most people miss it. They mention the vote is basically 50-50, but at the same time, they're confident calling it because of where the remaining votes are coming from. So think about that. It's not just how people vote. It's where those votes are located. And if you understand that, you understand the entire concept of redistricting. If you can shape the map, you can shape the outcome without changing a single vote. That's the game. Now, pause and think about that for a second. If outcomes can be influenced without changing votes, then the structure of the system matters just as much as the voters inside it. Now, this matters when districts are drawn in a way that heavily favors one side. Elections in those districts stop being competitive. And when competition drops, accountability usually drops with it. A safe seat doesn't represent people, it protects power. And as you know it, us being a constitutional republic, even though we know that the favorite line when it comes from the Democrats, they like to say democracy. Democracy, okay, is the popular vote, but it's still a voting process where people's voices are heard. But the constitutional republic is basically saying that the American people vote, and based on the earned vote from the American people determines the representative as a public official that represents based on the process of American people making their voice be heard by the vote that was earned from the American people, right? So that has real world effects, whether people realize it or not, because it changes how decisions get made on things like taxes, regulations, and economic policy. Now, for years, we heard that gerrymandering is a threat to democracy, that voters should choose their representatives. Mentions about the constitutional republic that I mentioned earlier, right? That's what we are, a republic, not a democracy, even though that's a favorite thing that like to be said. And on principle, that makes sense. But here's the question that comes up in moments like this. Are we applying that standard consistently or only when it's convenient? Because if the standard only matters when it benefits one side, then it's not really a standard, it's a strategy. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to show you how this actually works. Because if you understand the system, you won't need anyone to tell you what to believe. And once you see that clearly, everything starts to click. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. And honestly, this is the part most people completely miss. There's a legal challenge sitting in the background of all of this, where the Virginia State Supreme Court is being asked to decide whether lawmakers stretched a special session beyond what the Constitution allows in order to pass this measure. So let's just slow that down for a second, because this isn't just about what happened, it's about how it happened. And here's the principle behind that. When the process becomes flexible, the outcome usually follows. And if you can bend the rules to get a result, then over time, those rules stop acting like guardrails. And once guardrails disappear, the system starts running on incentives instead of limits. Now, pause right there, because that one idea explains a lot more than just this situation. Now, they also mentioned that if this map holds, it could lead to something like a 10-to-1 advantage. Think about that. It's not a small edge. That's a major imbalance. And when you see numbers like that, it raises a simple logical question. How closely is representation matching the voters? Not emotionally, not politically, just mathematically. Because at some point, the gap becomes too big to ignore. Now, here's what this actually means in real life. When districts are drawn heavily to favor one side, as you guys can see on the screen, Virginia's proposed congressional district map. As you guys can see, from District 7, 11, 4, 2, 3, 1, 8, that's all Democrats. Only one district is Republican, District 9. Now, as you guys can see what it is currently before the proposal from the governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, it was even. Virginia has always known to be a 50-50 state. You know, the most neutralized state in the country. It could sway Republican, it could sway Democrat. But now, are we really upholding being a constitutional republic? Because the constitutional republic, like I said, is based on letting the voters decide the House of Representatives, not swinging things in favor of one side heavily, or things to be drawn out map-wise to favor one side. So then fewer elections are competitive. And when fewer elections are competitive, politicians don't have to appeal to as many people to stay in power. That changes behavior. It changes priorities. And over time, it changes the kind of policies that get pushed forward. Now, I want to bring the idea of Florida potentially responding, okay?
This week, Virginia voters will decide on a redistricting proposal before the state Supreme Court decides if it should be tossed altogether. The case centers around whether Virginia lawmakers violated the state's constitution by keeping a special session open for nearly 2 years to pass the measure, which critics call, quote, an abuse of legislative authority. If the measure passes Tuesday and survives the state's Supreme Court, it would reshape the state's districts, giving Democrats a 10-to-1 advantage in the midterms. Boy, they got to be salivating at that.
Has compact districts. It's done in a way that makes a lot of sense. And the reality is if you look at like California, you know, they're doing all this dog and pony show there now, saying, oh, Texas, we've got to combat Texas. California is one of the worst gerrymandered maps there is. You know, what they did, this is how they do. They're like, no, we're going to do an independent commission. So they do a commission. The problem is, it's like if you truly were independent, it's like you would be immune to any type of partisan pressures. But that commission is comprised of liberal Democrats, liberal independents, and very liberal Republicans. I think one of the Republicans is from Berkeley, like not exactly a hotbed of Reagan conservatism. It's just, it is what it is. So they hotwired that independent commission to produce a map that was very much gerrymandered and was not something that was fair to Republicans, even at that time. Now they're saying they want to do even more by doing whatever they're talking about doing now. So don't buy this notion that if someone has a commission, that somehow means it is immune from this type of partisan pressures. The California one was a left-wing commission. That's just the reality. That's what they produced. That's what they were supposed to do based on who appointed those folks to that commission. And so I just think it's better to just have the legislature do it. And if you don't like it, you can vote them out. You put some commission in, like California, and then stack it. If you don't like that as a voter, those people will never appear on your ballot. But that's exactly what they did there. And they've done it in other states as well. And then Illinois, if you look at Illinois, so Illinois, like if Chicago wasn't in Illinois, it would be a red state. There's some dots blue, but like most of it is red outside of Illinois. So if you drew compact districts, you'd have probably 6 in the Chicago that would be like 90-10 Dem, right? But then all the other ones would probably be Republican districts, and they didn't want that. So what they do is they go into the city of Chicago, they find enough Dems, and they draw a map.
We start with that call for redistricting from Governor DeSantis. He wants to redraw the congressional maps and is calling lawmakers into a special session to do it.
Could have a huge impact. Democrats call this a political power grab. West 2 News political reporter Greg Fox is here. So, Greg, the governor doesn't want to handle this during the regular session that starts next week.
Well, that's right. He's concerned that lawmakers will spend a lot of time redrawing the maps before the U.S. Supreme Court makes a ruling that could affect the drawing of districts across the country. So the special session will be April 20th to the 24th. Now, you may recall House Speaker Daniel Perez formed a redistricting committee last fall. They've had a couple of meetings so far. Perez had already indicated he wants to tackle the redrawing of congressional maps in the middle of the decade, something Democrats argue is unconstitutional. But Perez wanted to do that during the regular session. DeSantis said today his concern over racial gerrymandering is motivating him to get new maps done for this November's elections and believes it could affect 2 or more seats. Democrats fear it could affect 5 or more seats, including the local seats of Congressman Maxwell Frost and Darren Soto.
Our population has changed so much in the last 4 or 5 years. We need to get apportioned properly, and people deserve equal representation. And so we look forward to being able to work with the legislature to get that across the finish line.
We should have a system that respects the decade timeline and not engage in mid-decade redistricting, which we don't have constitutional standing for, and of course would be unprecedented in Florida's history.
Now that you bring Florida, you bring the idea of Florida potentially responding, as you guys heard, and you start seeing a bigger picture. If one state makes a move that shifts the balance, another state looks for a way to offset it. So what you end up with is not reform, it's a back and forth, an adjustment, and almost like an arms race where each side is trying to cancel out the other. And here's the key takeaway. When both sides are reacting to each other, instead of fixing the system doesn't improve. It just produces different winners. That's the big difference there, because one approach builds trust, the other just shifts power around. And if you understand that you're no longer just watching politics, you are understanding the incentives driving it. And when you talk about Florida, because this is where you really start to see how this turns into a chain reaction across the country, and the clips that you guys seen, they're talking about Governor DeSantis calling a special session to redraw congressional maps. And right away, it's described as a political power grab. And let's be real, that kind of framing usually depends on who's making the move. But here's the reality. The same action can be called necessary or dangerous, depending on who benefits from it. That doesn't automatically make one side right and the other wrong, but it does tell you something important about how narratives are shaped. Now, to be fair, there are real questions here about whether mid-decade redistricting should happen at all mid-decade. Some argue it breaks from tradition and raises constitutional concerns, while others argue that population changes justify updating representation sooner. Both arguments exist, but here's what this actually means in the bigger picture. If Florida moves forward and gains seats for Republicans, it could offset what Democrats gain in Virginia. And this is where the arms race idea becomes real, because now it's not about one state, it's about multiple states adjusting in response to each other. So on the surface, it might look balanced, but underneath is constant strategic movement. Now, pause and think about this. If both sides keep adjusting the system to counter each other, then the system itself never really gets fixed. It just keeps evolving to favor whoever is playing the game better in that moment. And that's a very different kind of stability. Now, think about what that does over time. If the system becomes a cycle of action and reaction, the focus shifts away from voters and toward strategy. And when that happens, the structure of the system starts to matter more than persuasion. In other words, it becomes less about winning people over and more about positioning. And that's a big shift because ideally, elections are about making your case to voters. But if the map is doing more of the work, that changes the incentive. If you can choose your voters, you don't have to win them over. And that's a line worth remembering because it explains a lot of what we are seeing right now.
News tonight, as CNN can now project that Virginia voters have approved a Democratic plan to dramatically redraw the state's congressional map. 92% of the results are in, with just over 51% voting yes on the ballot measure. Now, if this map is enacted, it means Democrats could win 10 out of the state's 11 congressional districts, which would boost the party at large in the fight for control of Congress. Harry Ensign is here to join us. And Harry, obviously, there were a lot of questions of how this would go tonight. Tell us what we're seeing in these numbers so far.
Yeah, I would just say, look, the yes side won. Yes, they are probably going to end up lower than the percentage that Kamala Harris won in terms of the margin. But you know what? A win is a win is a win. And this means a lot for Virginia. And I will just note, just look at this. They have basically going to gerrymander this state rotten. They are basically going to lock Republicans out of power in a state where Donald Trump got 46% of the vote back in 2024. House seats Republicans in Virginia are only going to really end up with 9%. That is quite the imbalance that's going on here, right? Of course, this is part of a larger national picture as well in terms of redistricting. And this, to me, is what is so interesting, right? Oh, we've had all this redistricting, right? It started in Texas. Then it was California. We've done Ohio. We've done North Carolina. We've done Utah. But heading into tonight, pre-Virginia results, the net gain from this mid-decade redistricting was really 0 seats, neither side gaining. But now is where we are right now with the Virginia measure passing. Democrats jump out ahead. They are the ones leading in mid-decade redistricting, leading right now by 4 seats on the strength of that yes vote, however thin that margin actually is.
So, Harry, I mean, obviously, Senator Warren was just talking about 6 months from now, the midterm elections. What could this mean for the fight for who controls Congress here?
Yeah, I mean, if you know anything about the House of Representatives, and you're down in Washington, D.C., so you know a heck of a lot more than I do, I would just say this. The power right now, it's so tight, right? Every vote is so tight in the U.S. House of Representatives. So you just take a look here, and this gives you the math of why this vote was so important. If you talk about the margin of the GOP majority in the House post the 2024 election, it was 2 seats, 2 seats. That's how many seats they could lose on a vote before losing the majority. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about Democrats gaining 1, 2, 3, 4 seats, 4 seats in Virginia. The simple math here is 4 is greater than 2. Without Democrats needing to pick up any more seats, this would eliminate the Republican majority and instill a Democratic majority because the margins are so tight. This vote in Virginia means so very much, and that's why all that money was spent on it. My goodness gracious.
Yeah, a ton of money. Harry, thank you for doing that math for us.
I know, it's very hard, very hard.
This is why we keep you around.
That's right.
Harry Ensign, thank you for that. For more on this, my political sources are here tonight. Jermichael, what's your assessment of what's happening?
I mean, look, I'm not happy about this. What we're seeing is a gradual destruction of incentives in our country. So what happens when you create an atmosphere and an environment where compromise no longer exists? Yeah, maybe this is good for Democrats today, but is it good for the long run? Probably not. For 4 years, there was an argument from my friends on the other side about democracy falling in darkness. Well, how in the hell is this preserving democracy? And look, I'm not saying that one side over the other doesn't gerrymander. Hell, they all gerrymander. It's just not a good thing at all. The American people don't benefit from this. And as someone who resides in Virginia, where you have, 40+% of the state that voted for the current president, rather, leaving only 1 Republican congressional seat seems to be in force of democracy and protecting the Constitution and the preservation of these great ideals. I would think not.
Well, I mean, what do you say to that? Because that was a question we asked a lot of Democrats once they launched their own redistricting efforts after we saw what happened in Texas. But a lot of them argued to us was, well, if the Republicans are doing it, we're also going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the real problem here is that Republicans launched a mid-decade redistricting project in Texas. Virginia came up with its results, but Florida is likely to redistrict in the next couple of days. In fact, they held off for the vote. I think, for political reasons, but they are likely to redistrict. So at the end of the day, I think Democrats and Republicans will roughly match out to be equal. We don't know what Florida will do. I think maybe they'll be concerned that redistricting could end up, they could end up losing some of those seats because there could be such a great wave. But I think the truth is that Democrats have supported a nationwide ban on partisan gerrymandering. Republicans have opposed that. This was a part of legislation they tried to pass in the last cycle. Republicans have opposed that. I believe that we should have a nationwide ban on partisan gerrymandering. The real thing that set this all off was Donald Trump called into Texas and asked them, not by anyone voting, but just asked the legislature to change. And in California and Virginia, at least they asked the voters to weigh in. This is very different than what happened in Texas. Voters have said they would like to move forward on this because they recognize the stakes with Trump ending accountability through gerrymandering mid-decade.
Scott, what's your take?
Virginia literally had the fairest maps in the nation. They had a 6-5 map, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. In terms of proportional representation, they had the fairest map in the nation that was drawn, by the way, by an independent commission that the voters asked for just a few years ago. Now they will have the least fair maps in the nation. And I'm not surprised that the yes vote won. They had all the money and all the lies. And sometimes in politics, when you got those two things, you can put something over the line. Even something as egregious as this whole thing has driven Spanberger's approval ratings down into the toilet. She lied to the people of Virginia. They had to write a ballot question that was a joke. They drew maps that were a joke. Now you're going to have huge chunks of rural Virginia represented by 5 or 6 Democrats who all live in Northern Virginia within about 15 miles of each other. It's a complete joke. Everybody knows it. And there's a reason that all these national Democrats and all their money came into Virginia because, they don't really care about the people of Virginia. They just care about power.
If we could just put that new map back, Nira, I want you to respond to that. But if we could just put that new map back up, that's back up that you can see, obviously, what the proposed districts that were on this ballot look like.
Here's the thing. Unlike in Texas and other states, in Texas and Florida, they are not putting this up to the voters, right? Republicans, I don't know, they have a lot of money in their coffers, as far as I can.
Now, this is where everything comes together because we're looking at the actual numbers and what that means in the real world. In this final clip, they confirmed that this measure passed, and if it holds, Democrats could win 10 out of 11 congressional districts in Virginia. At the same time, they point out that Republican presidential candidate received around 46% of the vote, right? 46% of the vote. As we go back into the video, when the guys at the beginning was doing the numbers when it came to right there in the state, 46% of the vote in the state. So let's just walk through that clearly. Nearly half the voters support one side, but the representation could end up heavily concentrated on the other. Now, pause right there because that's not just a political talking point. That's a structural outcome. And when outcomes look like that, it naturally raises a question about how the system translates votes into representation. Now, one of the most important points in this clip is how tight control of the House really is. We're talking about margins of just a couple of seats. So when you see that, right, margins of just a couple of seats here, as you see the map panning out the way it is, so when one state can shift 4 seats through redistricting, that can determine which party controls Congress. And when one party controls Congress, that affects legislation, spending, oversight, decisions that reach into everyday life, whether people follow politics or not. Now, this parts matter. One of the commentators actually pointed out that when both sides engage in this kind of strategy, it starts to break down incentives for compromise. And that's a serious issue because compromise usually happens in competitive environments. If districts become less competitive, the pressure to find middle ground starts to disappear. And when that happens, division increases and problem solving tends to slow down. Now step back even further because this connects to the long game. Population shifts, the census, and future redistricting cycles will continue to reshape everything. So even if one side gains an advantage now, that doesn't guarantee anything long term. And here's the bigger principle. The system will keep producing outcomes based on the rules and incentives in place. So the real question isn't just who wins today, it's whether those rules are consistent and whether they lead to fair representation over time. Because if people start to feel like the system isn't consistent, trust begins to erode. And once trust goes, everything else becomes harder to hold together. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't just look at who's winning or losing. Look at how the system is working, what incentives it creates, and whether those incentives lead to outcomes that actually reflect the voters. If you can see that clearly, you'll understand a lot more than the average person following this, right? So family, I want you to keep in this mind, like I said in the beginning earlier in this video, a democracy, whatever most people say goes. A constitutional republic, which we are. Most people decide, but they can't cross certain lines or guardrails. So I want you to ask yourself, if you're operating a democracy and it's what most people says, but now there's being a strategic thing taking place like a redistricting referendum where it's in favor of majority of districts for one party to be in favor to stay in control, and whatever most of those districts happen to be in favor of that party goes. However, does it really earn the vote if whatever most people are saying you have to go along to get along? And now that maps are drawn out for that party to automatically stay in that favor of it, is it really a democracy? Because now it comes off hypocritical. I'll tell you why. Because if you are redistricting strategically a map to make things whatever say it goes, then how can you actually allow people to let their voice be heard through the popularity of whatever people choose to say go based on popularity anymore if already the strategic output is already in that favor without even people saying anything because the map's decided for itself? Because in the constitutional republic, which we are, and I try to brush up on the Constitution and our founding fathers because there's so much to read and we should continue to do so and uphold that. That is basically saying whatever that is most people deciding. But the guardrails is redistricting cannot take place for one party to have favor over others strategically, aka gerrymandering, right? Because then you can allow people voice to actually matter based on their vote and it actually be earned, where it takes the power out of the public official and back into the hands of the people in which they have to earn a vote. You get where I'm going with this, family? So what I'm basically saying is there's guardrails because you cannot let power egotistically be full of itself that now they take the power from the people and they continue to strategically look to keep themselves in power, taking away the voice of the individuals that voted through the process and letting the process play out. And then fairly, letting the process play out fairly, and then that vote be earned or the votes be earned for that public official to be elected in the first place. So now it begs the question of one party, the Democrats happen to say democracy a lot, but it's coming off hypocritical as a democracy if things are continue to sway away and their liking, whatever, without the popular vote even taking place because it's already deemed to fall in favor of the popular vote based on strategically mapping things out to your favor, which then doesn't really make it competitive. So if you can see that clearly, you understand a lot more. And if you got value from this, if this actually made things clearer instead of more confusion, then go ahead and like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more breakdowns like this. I hope I got you guys just thinking, got the juices flowing in your brain. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what to think, what to do, how to say. We just having a productive conversation. And I just wanted to break it down for more clarity so you can be informed and then you can make the decision for yourself. Because not only do I want to continue to advocate and continue to follow the guardrails and the law and us being, well, first abiding by the Constitution, also a constitutional republic in which we are, like I've been saying, because all that is you thinking for yourself and your voice actually matter based on the action of you deciding for yourself rather than a democracy where popular vote is basically you go along to get along. And if a majority of people is voting this way, then it doesn't matter if you vote different because your vote is going to be what the majority of people say rule. I mean, it's already have happened. Not only has now Governor Abigail Spanberger in Virginia proposing this redistricting map that has been blocked by a Virginia judge. But she's already passed it, as whereas though the voting for the presidential election basically goes democracy wise for the rest of the country. So even if Virginia votes Republican, the presidential candidate can earn, the Republican presidential candidate may have earned the votes of Virginia as a state as a whole. But now Governor Abigail Spanberger basically took the voice away of the vote and say, even if our state decided to vote Republican, if the rest of the world by 100,000 more votes vote Democrat, then all of our votes are going to be Democrat. And basically all our whole state voting wise, all of our votes in this state will go to that Democrat person because that's what the rest of the world, based on popular vote, voted for. So again, it takes away the earning in the fair competition to be competitive enough to let the states, or I should say Virginia specifically, because it's a pact that she's trying to create in regards of this whole thing where if other states opt in, because it's not approved yet, but it's a pact that she's trying to create where other states, if they opt in with enough states, then it would take place where Virginia votes, all of its votes will go based on the rest of the country voting on the presidential election. So she's already revamping things where it takes away the ability to think for yourself because you have to go where the rest of the world goes. So even if you vote a different party, but the other parties continue to win vote-wise for the rest of the country, your vote is going to change to the rest of the countries right along with your whole state of Virginia. So anyway, family, let me know what you guys think. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. And always stay informed so you don't have to get informed. Peace, family.